Hey folks, and welcome on in. For those of you just joining, we built this Takom Panther G last week with full interior, and this week we're going to be painting it with a 3-tone camouflage. I'm also going to show you some of my techniques for weathering and for this camouflage. Get ready. Alright, so first off, we're going to start with a nice brown oxide primer. Now, the reason I chose this brownish primer for the interior is because the interior is going to be a root brown, which is a red-brown color that was actually used as a primer during this time. But I actually did miss a step here, well, at least on the metal parts. So we gotta go back and prime our metal parts with Mr. Metal Primer, or I use that. I know VMS also has a solution that they offer as well. We need to prime those metal parts or else the paint will chip off. We're also gonna prime all of our interior parts like that radio that we built last week. And again, I'm choosing this brownish color so I keep it warm. And this is the root brown I've been talking about, this red-brown color. This is the primer that they used in 1944. Really, it's the primer they used throughout the war, but specifically in 1944, the time when this tank would have been built, they actually didn't paint the interiors white. The entire interior was actually kept this red-brown color. Not really sure why. Might have been supply issues, but either way, they did not paint them white during this time frame. This is all a red-brown interior. So as you saw, we did that to the inside of the upper hull. We did that to the rear plate. We also did that to the inside of the turret. Now we're doing it as well to the gun breech. And again, we're just doing this throughout. Here's our turret basket. Again, I really like this red-brown color. I mean, this primer color is just such a nice color. It has a nice warm hue, which is why we chose that brown oxide primer. It keeps that warm hue rather than desaturating it with a black undertone if we used a black. So now we're going to switch over to grays. So I use Schwarzgrau and Dunkelgrau, which is essentially like a black gray and a dark gray. And what we're doing with these is we're just painting the grays on the interior. So we have things such as the periscopes, some other boxes on the inside here, and then we're also going to make sure we paint the radio and other components inside here. So gun breech, again, we're just focusing on grays and a lot of the other detail painting. So I did make a mistake here inside the turret. I started painting the traverse gray. It's actually supposed to be black, but you'll see I fixed that here. And here you get a good shot of the inside once everything was painted with the colors, and I added some decals as well. It looks really good. We also did paint the fume extractor a nice flat aluminum type color. There you can see the gun breech with a little bit of weathering I did on the inside. I didn't record the weathering process, but I did obviously show you here the final result. And you can see I did some dry brushing on the elevation of the gun. Here you can see I fixed that color to black inside the turret, and you can see there's a seat for the commander. Again, I fixed that color. I accidentally painted it gray to start, but it's okay. Went over with black. I don't think you would notice. So here I want to show you a little dry brushing technique. So over top of this black, what I'm doing is I grabbed just a bright silver dry brush color by Ammo. These dry brush colors, they're very thick, so you can get a lot of use out of them. And then you can put them inside. This is one of their dry brushes, and it just has a lot of thick bristles to it. So you don't have to use their dry brush. Any kind of thick bristle brush will work. Basically work out the extra paint and then just go over the edges, and you can see how well those details pop when you dry brush. All those raised edges looks really good. So inside the turret basket, I did do some weathering. Again, I didn't film the chipping and whatnot, but just trying to show some of the weathering that I had done thus far. And I wanted to show you guys how exactly I like to do, especially on the inside the dirt. I really like pigments. You can see here I put some of the Europe Earth pigment down first, and I'm using this dark Farm Earth, which just is a darker tone. And the idea is just to give us some contrast in the dirt, so it's not just all one shade of brown. I wanted to put in a couple shades of brown. And I love working with pigments because they give you that matte effect right off the bat, and you can also blend them very easily. You don't have to worry about wet blending or anything like that. There's no real skill needed. You're just blending powder. Okay, if you can put the two powders together, you can make this. And then what we're going to do is take this fresh engine oil and this streaking grime, and we're going to mix it in. And what's great is now you have this matte pigment. You're going to add in some of these enamels, and what's going to happen is they're actually going to blend right in front of you, and what you get left with is what would naturally happen. You're going to have this dirty, grimy, filthy look, which is how it would really look over time, between mud and grease and grime and buildup inside of these machines, right inside this tank. The effect is just absolutely well done. So then I also, if you take notice, I did do some dry brushing again with the silver over top of like this pedal here. I think this is actually for the gunner, if I remember right. It could be the elevation. I'm not 100% sure of what everything is inside. I'm still learning, and that's why I wanted to do these interior tanks. I wanted to learn exactly how these things work on the inside. It's just really neat to see. So again, you can see I'm just using all of these enamels all over these pigments, and again, it's just giving us that nice, dirty, grimy look. Now granted, it might look a little weird at first because the enamels are going to be wet, but over time they're going to harden and dry, and it'll give you a nice look. Now what I'm doing here is I went back over, and to build up the effect, I added a little bit more pigment. So if you want to add more texture, or maybe you just want to make it blend a little bit more, you can go back and add more pigment after the fact, and then just again blend it with some more enamels. That's what I love about it. You can put as much pigment as you want in there, you can mix it up, and then you can add more enamels. It's such an easy technique that's almost foolproof, really, because you can just keep playing with it. So again, it was very hard for me to capture the process inside the tank just because it's such tight quarters, and it's hard for me to get my camera in and still be able to get my brush in there. But I just wanted to show you guys what I was able to accomplish on the inside. I did a little bit of chipping. Again, I got a little bit of a glare there, but there's some chipping on the inside. I did the same process I just showed you guys on the turret basket I did inside the tank here. And then I just wanted to give you a quick glimpse of some of the weathering I had done early on the engine deck. A lot of, again, engine grime, oil. So at this point, now that the turret basket is done, we can assemble the turret basket to the bottom of the turret. And I just really thought this looked so good coming together. Just such a beautiful thing. I mean, just look at all those details, the dirt and the grime on the bottom of the basket. We have all that chipping, all that dry brushing. It just really makes this turret feel lived in, okay? It's just such a beautiful thing, and I was just so happy with how this turned out. And then we put the gun breech in, and you can really see this thing come together. It is interesting that the vision port there is a nice yellow color, but here we go. Here's what it looks like all put together with the interior. Just wanted to give you guys a shot of just this tank with the interior. None of the exterior pieces on. I have to give credit to Takom, and this is my first interior build, and I'm so excited to do more. And I have a whole list. I have many different Russian tanks, I have a few more German tanks, and I have some American tanks, both World War II and post-war modern tanks with interiors to do in the future. So again, there'll be plenty of content. If you guys like what you're seeing, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. Tell me what you guys want to see next. I have plenty of tanks to choose from, and I'd love to hear from you guys. So that's not all we're doing today. We painted the interior, now we're going to move on to the exterior. Again, we need to start with the metal primer. We have so many metal parts. I mentioned there's over 300 photo etch parts on this build, and that's an estimate. There's probably more than that if you guys remember from the last video, and if you didn't see that last video, I'll put a link in the description for you guys to show you the build. Now, I noted here you don't want to put the metal primer on any of the open grate surfaces like that air intake for the radiators. You do not want to do that, okay? Because it'll plug it up and make it solid, and you'll lose your texture, so don't do that. Now on the exterior, what I decided to do was actually try something a little bit different because I wasn't anticipating using chipping fluid on this build, although we could do that sometime. I actually chose to use a red oxide primer that's of the Ammo's lacquer collection to try it out. So we'll talk more about that here in a moment, but I actually moved on for just a moment here onto tracks, and I'm using Mr. Oxide or Mr. Surfacer. black surface primer for these. Again, trying to stick with some lacquers to try them out on this build because I've mostly used acrylics up to this point. So on top of that black surface primer, I want to use Dark Tracks, because Dark Tracks is a great color. It kind of already gives it a rusty steel hue, which is really, really nice for our armor models, okay? But one of the things you'll notice is that the track pins kept coming out. So this is actually a set of T-Rex tracks. They're resin 3D printed and they're really beautiful, but the pins kept coming out. And you can see what I did is just add some more rust effects. We did some dry brushing with some silver, and I wanted to just show you kind of, that's what the look we're going for. I'm going to show you how I did it on the second set of tracks here. Okay, so we have some again, pigments. I really do like pigments, because again, it's almost a foolproof thing. You can put them on, you can spread them out, you can dump them on, you can put them on lightly, and you're gonna have that effect regardless of how much you decide to put on. And you can take it off with some enamel thinner. It's real easy. If you don't like the effect, you just wash it off and start over again. It's just such an easy thing you can do. Now again, we're adding in Europe Earth. If you remember, we used Europe Earth in that farm dark dirt earth, you know, freshly tilled mud, think something like that. Those are the colors we're sticking with for this. Now, I will say that dark earth doesn't come out as well on the dark tracks, but you can still see it. Now look how nice that looks when you dry brush. You dry brush that silver on. We're just getting the cleats, so it looks like it's rubbed off, right? And that makes it look like, well, how it would really look, which is the dirt's not going to stick to those cleats. Those cleats are going to dig in, and it's actually going to get like a polished look to it because they'll wear. And that's what we're going for. And then we did the same thing on the guide horns on the inside, right? Because they rub against the inside of the road wheels. And I'll show you what I did on the wheels a little bit later. So switching over, so again, I said we use this red oxide primer because I just wanted to try this lacquer. And you can see it's much more of a saturated red. So I definitely didn't want to do any chipping over it because it's a little too bright. And then I went with this Dunkelgelb, which is actually a 1944 color. It's not so saturated yellow, it's more white. And actually I held this color up against Cream of Ice, which is the normal color you see especially on the interiors of these German tanks from World War II. They're almost identical. They have a different RAL number, but I'm telling you, to the eye, I could not see the difference. So what we're doing here is just putting a base coat down of this. Again, it's called Dunkelgelb, but let's just call it not white, because that's pretty much what it is. And then what I did was I actually added, you can see the difference, from the Dunkelgelb set from Ammo, I actually put in some light base, which is the second highlight essentially, and you can see how much darker it is than this quote-unquote Dunkelgelb. So I actually put in some light base to give some dark undertones. So this is what we're doing, is we're shooting this slightly darker tone into all the recesses, shadowed areas to try to create the false shadows, right? So this is what's called post shading. If you take notice, again with my red undercoat, we did not do a zenithal lighting, so we didn't do any white highlights or anything like that, or black for the shadow areas. So what we're doing is what's called post shading. We're shading the base coat after the fact. And what we're doing is we're finding all them recessed areas. Here you see me going along the weld seams and whatnot, and we're putting in that darker shade. Now, the next step is we're adding a little bit of satin white, because again, I could not find any lighter Dunkelgelb or something lighter that had a warm tone to it, because this isn't a very warm toned paint. It's very desaturated. It's almost white. So the only thing I had that was whiter than almost white was just satin white. So I mixed that in as a highlight. And what I'm trying to do is, again, this is kind of where you're doing a zenithal to a point, where you're just trying to get all the flat areas as a highlight, and this essentially becomes your base coat, because you've already done a base coat, but now you're highlighting all your flat areas. So this is almost the base color of your tank. Now I didn't do a lot of satin white, I just put a few drops in to lighten it up, and you can see there's a slight shade difference. And what you'll notice now, especially at this angle, you can see the shadow effect that we're getting. Again, this is a very desaturated color, but I wanted to keep it as true to the historical accuracy as I could. And from colorized reference photos that I had, that I showed you guys the black and white photos, I had them colorized just so I could verify. And this color does look pretty close from what I could tell. So again, you can see I added just a little bit more satin white and a few more drops to try to do any of the really raised portions of the tank. Anything really highlighted, like the corners, the tops of things, anything that was just sticking out above everything else. This is where we want to highlight, and this is the highest I'll go in terms of my color, and I'm telling you, at this point it's almost white, and I did not add that many drops of satin white into the original Dunkelgelb. Now this is the color scheme we're going for. You can see it's like a camouflage, and we're going to use this masking putty. This is from Ammo's Encyclopedia of Armor. So I also had some reference photos, and I mentioned this reference photo in my last video, but you can see that's actually a photo of a Panther G with an IR, and it had the ambush pattern. So we're actually going to do the 3-tone pattern. So we're going to use the art within the instruction booklet as a guide for our pattern. So what we're doing is we're taking this masking putty, which is similar to like blue tack or silly putty. It really does work well. It just forms up so well, and you can see it has a nice stick to it, but it's easy to work with, and it's really easy to kind of mold and shape. And here you can see what we're doing is we're masking off the parts that are going to stay this not white color, and we're going to by painting it green, right? So we're going to paint this whole thing green over top of this mask, and the only thing that's going to stay this not white color is going to be the parts that are covered. So I didn't want to cover too much because this not white was, I just wasn't in love with it. It was just so much not white and not enough Dunkelgelb. It wasn't yellow enough. It just wasn't warm enough, in my opinion. But again, it's historically accurate. So I actually did follow the booklet again for the places that I covered up with the masking, and you can see what I'm doing here. I did a base coat in the Reseda green, and then I added some darker green into it. I actually put some olive drab base into it, just so I stuck with the brownish greenish, so it stayed a warm green, but gave us the shadows we wanted. So we're just going through, same thing we just did with the Dunkelgelb, but we're doing it with the green. Now with the wheels, what I did, again using the reference drawing, I actually painted individual wheels. Rather than following a cloud pattern over the wheels, I just highlighted specific wheels in an entire color. So the next step here is I added a little bit of the Dunkelgelb, the not yellow Dunkelgelb, which is supposed to be dark yellow, by the way. In English it's not dark yellow at all. That's why I keep saying not white. So I put some of the not Dunkelgelb, not white, into the green and gave it a little bit of highlight. And again, I think this really turned out nice. This green color was so nice. I'm so used to olive drab. I've done mostly American tanks. I've only done one German Panzer IV, and that was in Dunkelgelb, actual Dunkelgelb, like yellow Dunkelgelb, like dark yellow, like it's supposed to be. I know, you can see I'm very stuck on the fact that it's not Dunkelgelb. So this green turned out really nice. So again, I'm adding more masking on. Now, one of the things I did, and I want to point out here as I'm painting on this Choco Brown, which is a chocolate brown, again, very nice warm hues. It's just that the green is warm, this brown is so warm, and that Dunkelgelb is just so not warm. So the masking, I actually left it on because I painted the green and then I had to go to work, and when I came home from work, the goo, as I called it, the goo monster, there was just black masking everywhere. It kind of just sunk on top of the tank, so I had to reform it a little bit. You're seeing a few pieces that were left here. Then when I painted it the next morning, all the goo had kind of sunken all over this tank. So what you're seeing is kind of what I put back, and some of it I just kind of left as is to show you that it just turned into a goo. There was black, like it leveled on the tank, and it got into every nook and cranny. And I'm going to show you that I was still finding stuff all the way through the weathering, chipping and weathering stages. I found goo in places. It was very frustrating. So back to the brown painting. So I added, you can see I added some highlight, some lighter paint in there to be able to do the highlights. And again, you see I turned the tank on its side just so we can focus on shooting from the top. And then now that we have our 3 tones on, it's time to take this goo off. And you can see I'm just struggling. It's just stuck in every nook and cranny. So this stuff is great, don't get me wrong. I highly recommend, if you want to do any kind of camouflage, just get this stuff. It's very inexpensive. And there's multiple different brands you can get. I think Andy's Hobby Headquarters offered his own just recently, and it's very inexpensive. The only thing I'll say though, if you want to use this stuff, and again I recommend that you do, don't do as I did. Do not leave it on overnight. Don't leave it on for any extended period of time. Put it on, form it up, paint it, let it dry for a few minutes, because we know airbrushing does not take long to dry, especially acrylics. Maybe if you're using some not enamels, some lacquer paints, maybe that's going to be a little bit different because you have to wait until it dries. But still, don't leave it on overnight, or else you're going to be doing what I'm doing. I got to the point where I had to ball it up to actually use its own stickiness against it, so to speak, to pull it out. Now what I'm doing here is I just took a little micro brush to clean up some of the rough edges I had on the brown, because I did pull it off. After I painted the brown, but remember, the brown had time, or the goo had time to soak in, if you will, before I painted it brown, and I think that's what led to the chipped edges on the brown. So the next step, I gave it a shot of satin primer from VMS, and then I put a filter on, because remember, that not white is really not white, and we need to bring all three of those pieces of camouflage together. So this tan tone for 3-tone camouflages, this filter really brought it together, and it made that not Dunkelgelb, not white color, it made it blend with the Choco Brown and the Reseda Green. I think it looked really nice. So then we're going to take our Mr. Mark Setter and our Mr. Softer, and we're going to put some decals on. Okay, now remember, we did textures when we built this, so there's plenty of Tamiya putty texture down on this tank. So of course we've got to use Mr. Mark Softer to get this to conform to that nice rolled steel texture. And you're going to see you have to use a brush or a Q-tip, something to just put a little bit of light pressure on there and not move it around too much. And these decals by Takom, they weren't terrible. They were a little thick, but I think I only needed to put like 2 passes of softer on, and they conformed right away and looked really good. So I was very happy with these. And again, I found these placements from reference photos, and the reason I put the cross so far forward and I put the number on the back of the turret, you'll see here in a moment why I did that. Okay, usually in the book you'll notice that they put the numbers on the side of the turret, and that is historically accurate. They do that, but I'm going to show you why I put it on the back. So the next step, again, with all the different coats, we did do highlights, and we did highlights, we did dark shadows, we did post shading on each one of the tones as we went. Now I've seen other folks where they post shade after all 3 base colors are down. I wanted to do it as I went. Why? I don't know, maybe I just want to practice. But in this case, what we're going to do is really bring those deep recesses, make them pop a little bit more by giving them a grime pass with an ink from Ammo called Grime, and it matches perfectly. It just gives it this grimy look near those recessed edges, and it just really brings it together. These are those reference photos I was showing you. You can see that there's the spare wheel and tracks on the side. That's what we're going to do, and that's why we didn't want to put the numbers, the identification number on the side, because these tracks would cover it up. Now I did see a reference photo where they actually painted the number over top of the tracks on the side, but I thought, okay, well, if we need to put spare tracks on them, we'd lose our ID number, and I didn't want to have to paint numbers and try to fit a stencil over tracks, so I just decided to put it on the back, which again I had a historical reference photo for. So I also wanted to paint the rubber on these road wheels, so I did that on the spare wheel, and then I also did it on the back wheel, or sorry, side wheels. And then I wanted to attach this spare wheel, and again, this is to match that reference photo I just showed you guys. And you see me using my activator again. And remember I said how we did some dry brushing on the tracks earlier, especially on the guide horns? Well, those guide horns rub against the second set of wheels, basically all the insides of the wheels, and it would actually rub it polished. So we wanted to give that effect with some polished metal. And then I also just did a little bit of dry brushing. You can see kind of before and after on those drive sprockets. So another little piece is adding some silver to the periscopes and to the lights, painting, everything gray that needs to be some kind of metal. So all of our engineering tools, shovel, painting everything gray, and then you'll see what we do in our next video, how we really bring that to life with some washes. So the last step here is to put some dark tracks on the spare tracks that we actually had attached earlier. So you can actually see there's pins and chains holding these tracks on. So I didn't want to remove them just because those pins and chains were very delicate. So we painted them right in place with dark tracks. And here we are, folks. Thank you so much for staying in till the end. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you like what you see, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, check out my Patreon. And if you are interested in the paint stand that I was using during today's video, I will have a link to it in the description. You can actually download that file and print it yourself at home if you'd like. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time when we weather this tank and add a full crew.